The alarm screamed through the corridors of the Eternal Mandate like a dying animal. And Commander Vethrix stood at the center of the bridge with his black scales gleaming under the red emergency lights. His 4 eyes moved across the damage reports that floated in the air before him, each one worse than the last. The spatial anomaly had torn through his ship like a blade through flesh. And now sections of the vessel were dying one by one. "Commander," his second officer called out. "Cargo Bay 7 has suffered critical damage and the outer hull is compromised." Vethrix turned his long neck toward the display that showed the location of the damaged section 17. Life signs blinked inside that bay. 17 small lights that represented the human workers assigned to that part of the ship. They were miners and engineers and medical staff, brought aboard because humans were cheap labor and they did not complain when given dangerous work. "What is the status of those life signs?" Vethrix asked, though his voice carried no real concern. "They are alive, Commander, but the section is venting atmosphere, and they have sealed themselves inside the emergency shelter within the bay." The officer paused and then continued, "We can send repair drones to stabilize the section and create an extraction corridor, but it will take approximately 6 hours. 6 hours. Vethrix looked at the main view screen, where the spatial anomaly pulsed and grew like a living wound in space. Every minute they stayed here increased the risk of the anomaly expanding and consuming the ship entirely. The mathematics were simple, and Vethrix had always trusted mathematics over emotion. 17 humans against the lives of 3,000 crew members. The answer required no thought at all. "Jettison Cargo Bay 7, he commanded." The bridge fell silent for a moment, and even the Selthari officers exchanged glances. A young communications officer spoke up with uncertainty in her voice. "Commander, there are survivors in that section, and they are still alive." "I am aware," Vethrix replied coldly. "They are acceptable losses, and the ship cannot wait 6 hours for a rescue operation that risks everyone aboard." He turned back to the view screen and added, "Log it in the records and prepare for emergency jump, because we leave in 10 minutes. Deep in Cargo Bay 7, the Elena Vasquez felt the entire section shudder as the emergency seals activated around them. She counted the people in the shelter with her. 17 humans trapped in a metal box that was slowly running out of air. What was that? A young woman named Yuki Tanaka asked, her voice shaking with fear. Marcus Cole, the chief engineer, moved to a small terminal and tried to access the ship's systems. His dark hands worked quickly across the controls, and then he stopped. His face went pale, and Elena felt her stomach drop at his expression. "They have disconnected us from the main ship," Marcus said quietly. "What do you mean disconnected?" asked Alexander Volkov, a massive miner with arms like tree trunks. Marcus looked at them all, and Elena saw something terrible in his eyes. "They are going to jettison us, and we have maybe 2 minutes before they cut us loose." Panic erupted in the shelter as people screamed and cried and beat against the walls. Elena forced herself to stay calm even though her heart was racing. "Everyone listen to me," she shouted, and her voice cut through the chaos. "We need to secure ourselves now, because when they release us, there will be a violent separation." Alexander grabbed the younger workers and pushed them toward the emergency seats along the walls. An older man named Dmitri helped strap in a woman named Grace, who was crying and holding a small locket against her chest. Marcus worked frantically at the terminal, trying to send a message, trying to do anything that might stop what was coming. But it was too late. The Eternal Mandate released Cargo Bay 7 with a thunderous crack that threw everyone against their restraints through the small viewport. Elena watched the massive ship grow smaller and smaller against the purple swirl of the anomaly, and then a flash of light, a ripple in space, and the Eternal Mandate was gone. They were alone. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming had been. Yuki was the first to speak. her voice small and broken. They left us. They just left us here to die. 18 hours, Marcus announced after checking the life support readings. That is how much oxygen we have, and after that we suffocate. Elena stood up from her seat and looked at the faces around her, saw terror and despair and the beginning of hopelessness. These were her people. Her species, abandoned like garbage by a galaxy that had never seen them as equals. For 300 years, humanity had worked among the stars. Always as servants, always as laborers. Always as the species that did the jobs no one else wanted. The Coalition had never granted them full membership or voting rights or any real power. Humans were tolerated because they were useful, and they were discarded when they became inconvenient, just like now. Listen to me, Elena said firmly. We are not dead yet, and I refuse to spend our last hours crying in a corner. She pointed at Marcus. You are going to find a way to extend our oxygen or rig some kind of distress signal. She pointed at Alexander. You are going to check the hull for any breaches we can seal. She looked at everyone else. The rest of you will inventory our supplies and help where you can, because we are humans and we do not give up. Dmitri nodded slowly and stood up on shaking legs. She is right. And if we are going to die, then we will die fighting, not weeping. One by one the others rose. Grace wiped her tears and moved to help with the supplies. Yuki took a deep breath and went to assist Marcus with the communications equipment. Alexander grabbed a welding torch and headed toward the outer sections. To search for hull damage, they had 18 hours. The Coalition had thrown them away like broken tools, but they were still alive. And where there was life, there was hope. Lena looked out the viewport at the endless stars surrounding them. Somewhere out there, impossibly far away, was Earth. She wondered if anyone would ever know what happened to them. If anyone would even care. The galaxy had made its position. Clear humans were expendable humans. Or acceptable losses. Humans were not worth saving. Elena clenched her fists and turned back to help her. People, if the universe wanted them dead, it would have to work for it, because 17 humans were about to show the stars what their species was made of. The hours passed slowly in the floating tomb that had once been Cargo Bay 7. Elena watched her people work with a fierce pride burning in her chest, because not one of them had given up, even though the numbers said they were already dead. Marcus had torn apart 3 different machines to build something that might extend their oxygen supply, and his hands were cut and bleeding, but he did not stop. I can recycle some of the carbon dioxide, he explained while connecting wires with shaking fingers. It will not give us much more time, but every hour counts. Alexander had found 2 small breaches in the outer hull, where precious air was escaping into the void. He stood in the freezing cold of the damaged section, with only a thin emergency suit protecting him, running his welding torch along the cracks until they sealed. The big miner came back with frost on his beard and blue lips. But he was smiling. 2 holes fixed, he announced. We just bought ourselves maybe another hour. Yuki worked on the communications equipment with a focus that surprised everyone. She was only 20 years old, an apprentice engineer on her first deep space assignment. And now she was trying to build a radio from scraps. The main transmitter is destroyed, she said without looking up. But I think I can make a receiver that will let us hear if anyone is out there. Dmitri moved among the others, telling stories of Earth to keep their spirits up. He talked about blue skies and green forests and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon some of the younger workers had never seen. Earth, born on colony ships or space stations far from humanity's homeworld, they listened to the old man's tales like children hearing legends of a magical kingdom. Grace had organized all their supplies into neat piles. They had emergency rations for 3 days, water for 2, and medical supplies that Elena used to treat the minor injuries people had suffered during the separation. It is not much, Grace admitted, But if we are careful, we can make it last. By hour 6, the mood had shifted from despair to determination. They could not control whether rescue would come, but they could control how they faced their situation. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she watched a young miner share his food ration with an older woman who looked weak. Nobody had asked him to do. I just did it because that was what humans did. They took care of each other. Hour 10 brought the first real crisis. The temperature began to drop as the heating systems failed one by one. Marcus tried to fix them, but there was simply not enough power left in the emergency batteries. We need to conserve body heat, Elena announced. Everyone gather in the center of the shelter and stay close together. 17 people huddled in a tight group, sharing warmth and sharing fear and sharing hope. Alexander wrapped his massive arms around 3 smaller workers and pulled them against his chest. In Russia we learned to survive the cold, he said with a grim smile. This is nothing compared to winter in Siberia. Nobody laughed, but several people managed weak smiles. Hour 12 arrived, and oxygen levels were dropping faster than Marcus had predicted. People began to breathe more slowly, trying to conserve air. Some fell asleep, and others sat in silence with their eyes closed. Elena refused to sleep because someone needed to stay alert. Someone needed to keep watch. She moved to where Yuki sat hunched over her makeshift receiver, listening to nothing but static. You should rest, Elena told the young woman. I cannot, Yuki replied. What if someone transmits while I am sleeping? What if I miss our only chance? Elena put a hand on Yuki's shoulder. You have done incredible work, and I am proud of you. I just wish it mattered, Yuki whispered. Nobody knows we are here, and nobody is looking for us. The words hung in the cold air like a curse. She was right, of course. The coalition had written them off as acceptable losses. No search party would come, no rescue ship would appear. They were simply going to fade away in the darkness between stars, forgotten by a galaxy that had never valued them. Hour 14 passed, hour 15, hour 16. Elena felt herself growing dizzy from the thin air, and her thoughts became slow and heavy. She looked at her people, at these 17 souls who had fought so hard and refused to surrender. They deserve better than this. Humanity deserve better than this. Suddenly Yuki sat up straight and ripped the headphones from her ears. I hear something, she screamed. Elena rushed to her side, heart pounding despite the lack of oxygen. What is it? What do you hear? Yuki's hands trembled as she adjusted the frequency on her crude receiver. A voice, she said with tears streaming down her face. A human voice. She connected the receiver to a small speaker, and the shelter filled with crackling static. Then, through the noise came words in a language that made Elena's soul catch fire. English clear and strong and impossibly beautiful. Unidentified vessel. This is the USV Reclamation. We have detected your position, and we are tracking your signal. People began to wake and rise, drawn by the sound of salvation. Hold on, the voice continued. We are coming for you. I repeat, we are coming for you. Grace fell to her knees and sobbed. Dmitri crossed himself and whispered a prayer. Alexander let out a roar of joy that echoed through the shelter. Elena grabbed the speaker as if she could reach through it and touch the person on the other end. A human ship out here in coalition space, where humanity had no fleet, no presence, number right to exist. It was impossible, and yet that voice kept speaking, kept promising, kept telling them that help was coming. Yuki looked at Elena with wonder in her eyes. Who are they? Where did they come from? Elena shook her head slowly. I do not know, but right now I do not care. She turned to address everyone, her voice cracking with emotion. You all heard it, and they are coming for us. So we need to stay alive just a little longer. Marcus checked his equipment and laughed. We have maybe 3 hours of air left, and if they hurry, we might actually make it. The shelter transformed in an instant. People who had been preparing to die were now preparing to live. They moved and talked and helped each other stay awake because sleeping too deeply in thin oxygen could mean never waking up. Elena stood by the viewport and stared into space, searching for any sign of the ship that was racing toward them somewhere in the darkness. Humans were coming to save humans. The coalition had abandoned them. The galaxy had discarded them, but their own people had not forgotten them, and in that moment, Elena understood something important. They were never truly alone. They never had been. The darkness of space split open like a wound and light poured through. Elena watched through the viewport as something massive emerged from fold space. A ship larger than anything she had ever seen. The USV Reclamation was not beautiful in the traditional sense. It was scarred and battered, covered in welded plates and weapon mounts that bristled from every surface like thorns on a metal beast. This was a ship that had fought battles and survived. A ship built for war and forged in fire. "They are here!" Yuki shouted. "They are actually here!" The Reclamation moved toward them with surprising speed for something so large. Lights swept across the cargo bay as the ship scanned their position. And then a voice filled the shelter once again. "Survivors. This is Captain Jonah Mercer of the USV Reclamation. We are preparing to dock with your section." Captain Mercer. Elena repeated the name in her mind and wondered who this man was who commanded a human warship in space controlled by the coalition, who had somehow known they were here, who had come to save 17 strangers floating in the void. "Prepare for docking impact," the captain continued. "We will cut through your hull in approximately 4 minutes, so move away from the outer walls." The survivors gathered in the center of the shelter, holding on to each other as the massive ship approached. Through the viewport, Elena could see the Reclamation growing larger and larger until it blocked out the stars. Entirely, a grinding sound echoed through the metal as docking clamps attached to the cargo bay. Then came the cutting. Bright orange light traced a rectangle in the wall as plasma torches sliced through. The hull sparks flew and metal screamed, and the air grew warm with the heat of rescue. The cut section fell inward and crashed to the floor. Fresh air rushed into the shelter, clean and rich and wonderful. Elena took a deep breath and felt dizzy with relief. The opening came soldiers in powered armor, massive suits that made ordinary humans look like giants. They carried oxygen tanks and medical equipment, and the most important thing of all, hope. "Everyone stay calm," the lead soldier announced as his team spread through the shelter. "We are here to help you, and you are safe now." A medic in white armor moved to Elena's side and pressed an oxygen mask to her face. "Breathe slowly," she said with a gentle voice. "You are going to be okay." One by one, the survivors were treated and helped to their feet. Alexander needed 2 soldiers to support his weight as exhaustion finally caught up with him. Yuki collapsed into the arms of a medic and cried tears of joy. Grace clutched her locket and whispered "thank you" over and over. The soldiers guided them through the opening and into a corridor that led deep into the VI Reclamation. Elena walked in a daze, her mind struggling to accept that she was actually alive. The interior of the ship was functional and plain, built for purpose rather than comfort, but to Elena it looked like paradise. They were brought to a medical bay where doctors and nurses waited to receive them. Real beds and real food and real warmth. A young nurse helped Elena onto an examination table and began checking her vital signs. "You are dehydrated and your oxygen levels are low," the nurse reported, "but you will recover with rest." Elena grabbed the nurse's hand. "How did you find us? How did you know we were out there?" Before the nurse could answer, a door slid open and a man walked in. He was in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many horrors. His uniform was simple but carried the weight of authority. This was Captain Jonah. Mercer Elena knew it without being told. Dr. Vasquez, he said as he approached her bed. I am glad we reached you in time. How do you know my name? Elena asked. Mercer smiled, but it was a sad smile. We monitor all Coalition communications, and when the Eternal Mandate logged the jettison of 17 human workers, we intercepted the transmission. He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down heavily. The Coalition classified you as acceptable losses, and they did not even try to save you. Elena felt anger rise in her chest. The commander said we were not worth 6 hours. I know, Mercer replied quietly. I have heard those words before, and 20 years ago, I was on the other end of them. He told her his story. Then 20 years ago, Jonah Mercer had been a cargo handler on a Coalition transport when pirates attacked. The alien captain ordered all human crew members locked in a storage hold while the ship fled. 30 humans were left to be captured or killed. Their lives traded for a few minutes of escape time. Mercer survived the pirates through luck and violence and rage. He spent 3 years as a prisoner before escaping and finding his way to others like him, humans who had been abandoned by the galaxy and decided to do something about it. We call ourselves the United Systems Vanguard, Mercer explained. We operate outside Coalition law because Coalition law does not protect humans. Elena shook her head in disbelief. I have never heard of you. That is by design, Mercer said. We move quietly and we watch carefully. And when humans are discarded like trash, we come for them. He leaned forward with intensity in his eyes. Every life matters, Dr. Vasquez. Every single human life has value, and we will never stop believing that. Elena thought about the 17 people who had almost died because an alien commander thought they were not worth saving. She thought about 300 years of humanity being treated as lesser, as expendable, as tools to be used and thrown away. Why? She asked finally. Why risk your ship and your crew for strangers? Captain Mercer stood and looked around the medical bay at the survivors being treated by his people. Because you are not strangers, he said firmly. You are human, and that makes you family. He walked toward the door but stopped and turned back. Rest now, Doctor, because in a few days we have work to do. And the galaxy needs to learn that humanity is done being abandoned. The door closed behind him. Lena lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged to something greater than herself. The Coalition had thrown them away, but humanity had caught them, and she knew in her heart that nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and Elena stood on the bridge of the USV Reclamation beside Captain Mercer. The massive view screen before them showed the star map of Coalition space. Thousands of worlds connected by trade routes and political alliances. Somewhere in that vast network, the Eternal Mandate was continuing its journey as if nothing had happened. Commander Vethrix was probably reviewing reports and issuing orders, never giving a second thought to the 17 humans he had condemned to death. That was about to change. Are you ready, Doctor? Mercer asked without looking away from the screen. Elena nodded slowly. What exactly are we going to do? Mercer turned to his communications officer, a young man with scars across his face. Open a channel on all frequencies. Broadcast to every relay station in the sector. The officer worked his controls and then looked up. Channel open, Captain. We are live across 300 systems. Mercer stepped forward and his voice carried the weight of centuries of injustice. This message is for every species in the Galactic Coalition and every human being working among the stars. He paused and then continued with cold fury in his words. 3 days ago, the Coalition vessel Eternal Mandate encountered a spatial anomaly near the Koreth Nebula. And during that encounter, 17 human workers were trapped in a damaged section of the ship. The bridge crew watched in silence as their captain spoke truth to the galaxy. The commander of that vessel, a Selthari named Vethrix, made a decision to jettison those humans rather than spend 6 hours rescuing them. And he logged their deaths as acceptable losses. Mercer pressed a button, and the ship's logs from the Eternal Mandate appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. The cold calculations, the dismissive language, the complete disregard for human life, all of it laid bare for everyone to see. Those 17 humans did not die, Mercer announced. We found them and we saved them because human life matters even when the Coalition decides it does not. He looked directly into the camera with fire in his eyes. For 300 years humanity has served the Coalition faithfully. And for 300 years, we have been treated as expendable, as lesser, as acceptable losses. His voice rose with each word. No more. We are not cargo to be jettisoned. We are not tools to be discarded. We are human beings, and we will no longer accept a galaxy that treats us as anything less. The transmission ended and silence fell over the bridge. Elena felt tears on her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. What happens now? She asked quietly. Mercer sighed heavily. Now we wait for the storm. The storm came faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the Coalition Council issued a statement demanding the immediate surrender of the reclamation, and all personnel aboard. Commander Vethrix appeared in a broadcast of his own, his black scales gleaming as he dismissed the accusations. The humans were in a dangerous section during an emergency, he declared coldly. The decision to prioritize the majority of the crew over a small number of workers was logical and necessary. He showed no remorse, he showed no regret. He spoke as if the 17 lives had been nothing more than numbers on a report that the galaxy was watching now. And not everyone agreed with the Coalition's position on dozens of worlds. Alien species who had worked alongside humans began to question what they had been told. The Vortani, a race of empaths, released a statement expressing horror at the callousness of the decision. The Methric, known for their strict codes of honor, condemned Vethrix for abandoning crew members under his protection. Even some Selthari spoke out against their own commander, calling his actions a stain on their species and across human settlements everywhere. The broadcast spread like wildfire. Miners on asteroid colonies watched the footage and recognized their own lives in those 17 survivors. Engineers on space stations saw how easily they could have been the ones thrown away. Families on distant worlds realized that their loved ones were never truly safe under Coalition protection. Something was changing, something powerful and dangerous and beautiful. The Coalition felt it too, and they responded with force. A fleet of 12 warships was dispatched to intercept the reclamation and bring it to what they called Justice. Captain Mercer received word of the approaching fleet and gathered his senior officers. In the war room, Elena was there too, along with Marcus and Yuki and several other survivors who had chosen to stay. 12 ships against one, Mercer said calmly. They expect us to run or surrender. His first officer, a woman named Commander Sarah Chun, shook her head grimly. We cannot outrun them, and we cannot fight them. So what options do we have? Mercer smiled, and it was the smile of a man who knew something others did not. We have been preparing for this moment for 20 years, he said. We have ships scattered across the galaxy, human vessels that have been waiting for a signal. He looked at each person in the room with absolute conviction. The Coalition thinks humanity is alone and weak and divided, but they are wrong. He pressed a button on the table and a message began transmitting on frequencies only human ships could receive. It was a simple message, just a few words. Brothers and sisters, we need you. Come to these coordinates. The time has arrived. Elena watched the message go out into the void. Will they come? She asked. Mercer nodded slowly. They will come, because that is what we do. We are human. When one of us calls for help, The others answer. It does not matter how far away they are or how dangerous the journey. They will come. The hours passed as the coalition fleet drew closer. Elena stood on the bridge and watched the stars, wondering what the next day would bring. Would humanity rise to meet this moment? Would her species finally stand together against a galaxy that had never respected them? She thought about the cold void where she had nearly died. She thought about the voice on the radio that had promised rescue was coming. And she believed that humans would answer, because they always had, because they always would, because that was what made them human. The coalition fleet emerged from fold space in perfect formation. 12 warships bristling with weapons that could reduce the reclamation to dust in seconds. Commander Vethrix stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Judgment of Worlds, watching the lone human vessel on his view screen. They are not running, his tactical officer observed with surprise. They cannot run, Vethrix replied coldly. Our ships are faster and our weapons are stronger, and they know that surrender is their only option. He opened a communication channel to the reclamation human vessel. This is Commander Vethrix of the Galactic Coalition. You are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare for boarding. Captain Mercer's face appeared on the screen, calm and unafraid. Commander, Mercer said evenly, I remember you from the logs. You are the one who decided 17 human lives were worth less than 6 hours. Vethrix felt a flicker of annoyance. Those workers were acceptable losses during an emergency situation, and now you will face justice for your interference in coalition matters. Justice. Mercer repeated the word slowly. That is exactly what we are here for. Vethrix hissed with impatience. You have 1 ship against 12, and your bravery is admirable but foolish. So surrender now or be destroyed. Mercer smiled, and something about that smile made Vethrix uncomfortable. Commander, you made a mistake when you threw those humans away. You assumed nobody would come for them. You assumed nobody would care. You were wrong. The space around the reclamation began to ripple and distort. Fold space ruptures opened like flowers blooming in the darkness. 1 ship emerged, then 5, then 20, then 50 human vessels of every size and shape poured into normal space, surrounding the coalition fleet in a wall of metal and defiance. There were merchant ships with mining lasers welded to their hulls. There were old military cruisers that should have been scrapped decades ago. There were colony transports with armor plates bolted to their bows. There were private yachts and cargo haulers and research vessels. Every ship was different, but every ship carried the same flag, the flag of humanity on the bridge of the reclamation. Elena watched the fleet assemble with tears streaming down her face. Yuki clutched her arm and whispered in amazement. Where did they all come from? Everywhere, Captain Mercer replied. They came from mining colonies and space stations and distant settlements. They came from every corner of the galaxy. He turned to face his crew with pride shining in his eyes. They heard our call and they answered, because that is what humans do. Commander Vethrix stared at his view screen in disbelief. This is impossible, he muttered. Humans do not have a fleet. They do not have warships. This cannot be happening. But it was happening more. And more ships emerged from fold space until the human fleet numbered over 200 vessels. They were not pretty ships. They were not advanced ships. Many of them were held together with welded patches and desperate repairs, but they were here and they were not leaving Captain. Mercer opened a channel that broadcast to both fleets and to the entire galaxy watching this moment. Commander Vethrix, you asked why we would risk everything for 17 strangers. The answer is simple. They are not strangers. They are human, and that makes them our brothers and sisters. Every life you discard, we will reclaim. Every person you abandon, we will rescue. Every human you throw away, we will catch. He stepped forward with his voice rising like thunder. We're not your cargo. We are not your acceptable losses. We are humanity, and we will never stop fighting for each other. The human fleet moved into formation around the reclamation. A protective wall against the coalition warships. Vethrix knew the mathematics. His ships were more powerful individually. But 200 vessels against 12 created odds that even superior technology could not overcome. Commander, his tactical officer said nervously, they are locking weapons on our fleet. Vethrix felt something he had not. Experienced in decades' fear, these humans were not afraid to die. They had come here knowing they might not survive, and they had come anyway, because somewhere in that fleet were the families of miners who worked in dangerous conditions, because somewhere were friends of engineers who served on coalition ships, because somewhere were strangers who had simply heard the call and decided to answer. That was the thing about humans that Vethrix had never understood. They did not calculate the value of a life based on usefulness or importance. Every life mattered to them, every single one. Commander, his first officer urged, we should withdraw and reassess the situation. Vethrix wanted to fight. He wanted to prove that the coalition was still dominant, that humans were still beneath them. But he looked at the fleet surrounding him and knew the truth. Coalition had underestimated humanity for 300 years. That era was ending. All ships withdraw. Vethrix commanded bitterly, we are returning to coalition space. The 12 warships turned and fled into fold space, leaving the human fleet alone among the stars. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the cheering began. It erupted across 200 ships. Humans screaming with joy and relief and triumph on the reclamation. Elena hugged Yuki and Marcus, and everyone she could reach. Captain Mercer stood quietly at the viewport. Watching the stars, Elena approached him and stood by his side. We did it, she said softly. Mercer nodded slowly. This is just the beginning, Doctor. The coalition will not forget this day, and the road ahead will be long and hard. But we proved something today. We proved that humanity will not be ignored. We proved that our lives have value. We proved that when humans are discarded in the void, other humans will answer. He turned to look at her with fierce determination. Spread the word to every human in the galaxy. Tell them they are not alone. Tell them they will never be abandoned. Tell them that no matter how far they fall, we will be there to catch them. Elena smiled and looked out at the fleet of mismatched ships that had crossed the galaxy to stand together. 200 vessels, crewed by miners and merchants and engineers and dreamers too. 100 ships that had answered the call. 200 reasons to believe that humanity would survive anything the universe threw at them, because they had each other. And that was enough. That was everything. The stars shone cold and distant around them. But for the first time in 300 years, humanity did not feel small. They felt infinite. They felt unstoppable. They felt human. And the galaxy would never forget it.